Hello everyone! Today I thought I'd share with you a first wedding anniversary present idea that I made for my son and daughter-in-law. First wedding anniversary, as you know, is paper, so what better than a shadow box card representation of their house and garden? So in order to do it, I made this box from cardstock. It was 5 layers deep and helped by the fact that their house and garden is built on a hill, so giving me multiple layers to play with. I did all the various details, the walls and the hedges, the trees, the lawns, and even down as far as doing the pets. And the other thing that I really wanted to do was to enable it to light up, so I put an LED light box on the back, which means that it can now stand on a shelf and display their home from a bookshelf in the evenings. And I wanted to make it as reasonably accurate as possible, and the fact they recognised their home was a good sign. The box on the back I just made for some more cardstock. It was just 1.5 centimetres wide, and I fed LED lights through a hole in the back and encased it all in a little battery case carrier that I made again out of cardstock and using my embossing folder, and very easy for the batteries to carrier to slot in and out, so that when the batteries fail they can easily be replaced. So I think it makes a rather nice keepsake, and of course whilst your project would be entirely different, the principles that I'm going to show you of how I made it might work for you too. Here I'm just showing a little bit of detail. They've got 2 cats and I put them alongside the garden gate as well as all the foliage, and it just makes it a little bit more personal. So the way I started to do it was I did a mock-up just in paper first of a rough scene, just so I could work out how I was going to go about it. The first thing I made was the back panel, and it was 1 sheet of A4 cardstock divided via score lines into a 17 centimetre by 15 centimetre central panel. I cut out a rectangle with blue vellum stuck on the back, and that was going to make the sky, and I was going to have the light box behind it. The light box itself was 16.5 centimetres by 14.5 centimetres for the central panel, with scored edges of 1.5 centimetres and 1 centimetre, and I folded along the score lines and cut out the edges so that I could construct a neat little box. Then what I did was I made the carrier for the battery case, and to do that I took a little bit of excess white cardstock and I made it 3.8 centimetres wide because that fitted the battery nicely, by 5 centimetres high, folded it in half, and then I encased it in an embossed piece of card, which the V slotted into. It was just 0.5 centimetre wide gusset, and that gave plenty of room for both the card to slot into and then for the battery case. Once I'd done that, then I would stick it in place on the back of that LED box, so it rested nicely at the bottom of the panel. Inside I'd already threaded my LED lights on one corner only, because the sun only appears in one space at any one time in the sky, and I decided to have a beautiful clear blue sky to represent the lovely summer we'd had. Used little foam sticky squares to hold the LED lights in place, and then once I was happy with their positioning and checked that they worked well, then I could stick down the LED box itself, and I used PVA glue. It was a little bit narrower than the back panel, which meant that although it rested very nicely and gave the panel support, it didn't intrude on the sides, which were scored to face forwards once everything was done. So the final thing was that I made sure that I had enough lead so I could slide that battery pack in and out easily. The back panel for my scene was quite simple. It was 17 centimetres wide with 1 centimetre scored edges. I had tree dies. The one conifer I partially die cut into the cardstock at the height I wanted, at the position I wanted in the garden. For this tree I just used a little bit of it to partially die cut a shrub, and I'm just showing you the bit that I used. And then I took a wildflower die and cut that out on other bits of card, using the flowery bits to construct the back hedge. I then stuck that panel in place in front of the back panel with its blue vellum sky. For panel number 4, I did the same thing with a conifer in a different position. I also took this die, and what I wanted to do, because I wanted to represent a lawn, was took this grassy edge, cut it out, and then stuck it on the edge of the panel. I then put it in front of the 5th panel, and as you can see, it's starting to build the scene. The 3rd panel was probably the most complex. I had to convert this die, which was the nearest thing I could find to their cottage, into something that actually looked more like their cottage, and that was quite a task of partial die cutting, which I will demonstrate in another video in due course. I also then took a tree die, and I partially die cut it again to get the tree shape I wanted, and I used the grass cutouts to line the lawn too. Wildflower dies I again used not just to create flowers in the garden, but also to outline the path as well. So you'd create what you wanted with all the dies that you've got. So having done that, I then stuck it in place, and my scene was definitely moving forward. Panel 2 was the garden wall and hedge with a few shrubs, and I apologise for the overexposure. The sun came out as I was filming and it rather wrecked it. So I took a partial die cut from a winter scene. I again used wildflower dies to create a little bit of foliage on top of the wall. I got a hedge topping which I used from this tree die, which again I cut out separately and stuck in place, and I had foliage from more wildflower dies that I cut in place. And I'd already embossed partially the panel that was cut to the right size that I wanted using this brick wall embossing, and this is what it actually looked like, not overexposed. For the very front, I again embossed the wall at the front of the cottage using my embossing folder. Then what I did was, again using the same tree die, it made a beautiful hedge. The top, I cut it out on spare cardstock before sticking it in place on the panel. I also then, once I'd done that, I took the base of that tree die and made some foliage. I took a garden gate die and then cut it to the shape that I wanted. I stuck the foliage along the base in front of the wall, and I built up a lot of detail. Finally, I took some cat dies that I'd got to make their representations of their 2 pets, and this is what the final result looked like, and I was quite pleased with the realism of the scene. So I was really pleased with the results of the scene, but not quite so happy about the surround. It looked a little untidy, and so I decided that I would make 2 side pieces, the width of the shadow box plus a 1 centimetre fold, and stuck them on the sides, and I felt this neatened up the box completely and made a rather nice frame. I didn't want to enclose the top and the bottom because I felt it worked quite well as it was. So it just goes to show that you can make something entirely unique using dies that you have at home, and just needs a little bit of thought and a few photographs. I hope you've enjoyed it, and for more information do have a look on my blog.